Hello, this will be part two to the US Capitol building, Hermetic Themes and Meanings. We'll be having a look especially at, well, Hermetic themes, but as above, so below being one of these concepts where essentially we're creating a city and key points of architecture within that city which reflect the universe, the heavens above being projected down onto the earth below. But also this is very much written around Pythagorean themes, and they're interchangeable because, well, Pythagoras was known to have travelled to Egypt and other places and to have picked up his knowledge from there. So whether you say Pythagorean or Hermetic, essentially we have the same thing and we have the same meanings. And so in part one, I went into with a focus on concepts of time and on concepts of music built into the US Capitol building, and how it, of course, we see Hermes there in the mural. Um, the Doric order, the Ionic order, and the Corinthian order architecture, how not just aesthetic, but they are also musical and systems of measurement. And the US Capitol building is one of these temples, and it is literally based on old temples. You can physically see that in the architectural style. Neoclassical architecture being one of these, where classical, so Greco-Roman architecture was reintroduced, reborn. But grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, these are the seven liberal arts, but especially the quadrivium, geometry, music, arithmetic, and astronomy, which is built into these ancient forms of architecture and has been carried through until the modern day. But it is not talked about because it is problematic to the modern secular concepts. However, it's there. It can literally be measured. It can be tested. And so, to begin with, uh, architecture. So it's the architecture of a city, but in this particular series, we're talking about just the US Capitol building and how architecture is so important. Pythagorean, Hermetic schools, philosophies, systems of knowledge have been built into the US Capitol building, and through the quadrivium, especially, that can be read.
Look, why couldn't you make me an architect? You know I always wanted to pretend that I was an architect.
The architecture of the US Capitol building contains some beautiful, some extraordinary knowledge. So it's at 288 feet high, and this is just one example, just to revisit some of the themes from part one of this series. But not only at 288 feet high, which breaks down to these very important, these very significant numbers which cross multiple themes, especially the quadrivium, but it's also at a certain point where Doric, which is an ancient Greek system of measurement, a measurement of length, but it's also a harmonic or a harmony point where Doric and Ionic come together, not just at whole numbers, but at very beautiful, very important numbers which contain some very important information, especially in regards to the quadrivium, such as astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, and music. The This set of knowledge, which goes back to ancient Greece, ancient Rome, with origins even further back, has been continued through. And so it's not just about the columns themselves, and it's not just about modern Freemasonry, because the modern symbols of Freemasonry again go back to a ancient period of time. But the Capitol building itself has Corinthian columns on the outside. On the inside, it has the Doric and the Ionic. And Doric and Ionic, okay, so we look back at the Parthenon, the Salamis stone, which shows many important things. One of the most beautiful points about the Salamis stone is it shows that the allegedly modern foot is at least 2,500 years old, and it would extend much further back than that. But going back to the Hermeticists, musical modes, so Lydian, Ionian, or Ionic and Doric are also musical scales, which connects to the concept of weights and measures, and how ancient systems of weights and measure contain information. It's much more than just the surface value of it. It's actually quite a beautiful system. And the bureaus which control and regulate weights and measures have carried this on knowingly, possibly, but even just as a legacy of that. But just to review part one of his series on the U.S. Capitol building, and one of the main themes was the quadrivium, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, and music, and we'll review that now. Unlike geometry, arithmetic, and astronomy, music is something which is built into us down in a very, very deep level. It's just so important to the human experience that you cannot underestimate the importance of it. But in regards to Pythagorean music scales, as I went through this in part one, I'll put the link in the description. The US Capitol building is overloaded with this information, and this is just one building within the greater plan of Washington, D.C. Another theme running throughout the US Capitol building is the concept of time, and time again is so important to our modern but also to the ancient world. Now some people underplay the knowledge of time in the ancient world, but just look at the Tower of the Winds in Athens, and we'll look at how modern systems of time are actually embedded in the ancient world. But in part one we went through how the Mayan systems of time, also how the yugas blend beautifully, exquisitely, perfectly with this system. Coincidence be damned, this would not happen on its own. Well, even if you say, okay, well, maybe, well, it just so happens that the Mayans in the Americas and in the yugas in India, Pakistan region, just again connect wonderfully to even the Sumerian pre-flood kings list, and we can go further into that. But that will also blend beautifully into systems of measurement through the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Ark of Utnapishtim, and the ancient flood legend, which comes from there as well. Everything just comes exquisitely together, and it's music, time, measures of time, measures of music, measures of distance, and as we go further and further into it, measures of weight, even temperature, pressure. It just all comes back to these harmonic points, and it's just to explain it away as coincidence is the war cry of the fool. It is really you have a dogmatic bias, and unfortunately that's what we have in the modern world. We have this concept that we're at the end of knowledge and the development of these types of things, which is based on an arrogant preconception. And what's actually happened is through weights and measures we can literally trace it and go through, and how these will connect to so many wonderful how can I put this? Okay, I have to say it again, exquisite connections between especially the quadrivium, astronomy, geometry, music, and astronomy. But let's begin with, so we had a look at Doric and Ionic, how that converts. Well, the 288 feet high Capitol building also converts into the ancient long scale and the Indus scale, as in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. And we'll begin with the long scale, which is also, well, the Persian foot, sometimes called the northern foot, which is 1.056 feet per long foot. So that's your conversion point there. Interestingly, divide that by half, divide that by half, divide that by half, you'll come down to 33, which also happens in the Indus scale as well, but that's for another video. Some contend that the long foot was used in Stonehenge Phase 1, the earliest version of Stonehenge, not the later version. Even if it wasn't, it doesn't matter, because you just can trace through the northern foot, as it's called, or the Persian foot, so it definitely is an ancient system of measure. Now we also go to the Indus Valley Civilization, which is in current day Pakistan, right next to the border to India. The Indus emerged, according to official history, at exactly the same time as what the Old Kingdom in Egypt emerged as well, and it just so happens that the Sumerians, the Indus, and the Egyptians shared so much through their systems of weights and measures. And of course, this will all be described as a coincidence by the official establishment, because they are dead set on this version of that these cultures developed independently, simultaneously, independently. That there was no connections, there was no trade, there was no shared history between those, and it's just silly, because the symphony of coincidence that you need to believe in that version of history is like, oh God, how can it's so dogmatic, it's an extremist view. But anyway, the Indus foot 1.1 of the modern foot is the Indus Valley foot, and the standard street width in Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, was 33 feet. But again, that's another thing. And again, the connections to 33, both in the long foot and the Indus foot, wonderful. But let's look at the Indus. So 288 feet, which makes the US Capitol building 261.81818181 Indus Valley feet. You might recognize that number if you're into the golden ratio. In the top corner there we see a proportion of the Great Pyramid. If you're into your golden number, you'll also note that phi plus 1 equals phi squared, or phi minus 1 equals 1 over phi. This is one of the reasons why the golden number is so beautiful, and this of course all connects back to the Fibonacci scales. And so 2.6181818 equals 1.618 connects beautifully through there. The Great Pyramid has this ratio of 89 to 55. 89, 55, they are Fibonacci numbers. That is why the Great Pyramid has these phi proportions. Now that's based on the ideal measures. I've done some other videos. You actually get the perfect description of phi, not just in proportion, but also in meters if you use the J.H. Cole survey. But anyway, golden spiral, Fibonacci numbers 144 over 55, 2.61818, just again shifted decimal points. Okay, that's just a coincidence, blah blah blah, the official establishment history know-it-all. Well, it just so happens that the diameter of the sun in the long scale, specifically long rods, and what's one rod? 33 over 2. There you go, another 33 measurement. And so what we have is 26181818118, and again, just shifted decimal points. Now, even the scale of that being 1 million and 100, if you're into your Tetractys, Pythagorean Tetractys, what emerges from those, especially if you consider in the fourth dimensions, well, you get actually those factors of growth emerge again. Phi is the golden ratio. This particular spiral is built into nature. It's built into plants of the pine cone, for instance. The the spiral in sunflowers, even the number of petals, you'll find it in seed heads. You'll find it in here, such as in cauliflower, seashells. And it's just the most beautiful number, perfect number it is. It's not just in plants, but it's also in animals, but hurricanes, galaxies, but it also goes through the dimensions. I mean, it's not just one-dimensional ratios, it's two, and actually goes into three and extends. Just like Pythagorean theorem, this crosses dimensions. It's one of the fundamentals. It's built into the geometry, and, well, like, the importance of it cannot be underestimated. And now I'll have a little clip.
Yeah, but look at it. It's still completely random to my eyes. There's no way to...
I am ready to present a theory. Snails, noteless shells, ram's horns, these all have one thing in common: Fibonacci's golden spiral.
I'll be damned, Walter. That's it.
I believe the source of these time slips must be located in the center of the spiral.
Recently I posted a video on J.J. Abrams and how in his shows such as Fringe he alludes to this same set of knowledge. Well, there was a really interesting series called Dig that was 1 or 2 years ago come out. But what was interesting also in that show was that the the set designers, the cinematography was designed in such a way so you'd always get a sneak peek at the number plate of one of the main characters of his car, and that number plate was 1618. It's the phi ratio again. And if you watch the series, you've paid attention to it, you'll see how it's just so subtly done. And again, if you're in the film and TV industry, they're very careful with the way they design their shots, and especially if you watch it, if you saw the series or watch it again, pay attention, because this is just another example of how certain artists, including going back to even people such as Dali and other people, incorporate the golden number in their artworks.
He's into architecture.
Hey, just like you pretend to be.
Okay, so now we'll go back to have a look at architecture, and first we want to have a look at a clip interviewing an architect who looked into sacred geometry, the golden ratio, and these types of themes. It's taken from a video by Half a Sheep, fellow Australian here, who's into these same things. Please check out his channel. I'll put a link to his video in the description, and we'll have a look at that now. Henry Bialowas speaking about dark or hidden or occult architecture, and how it is not well received by the mainstream.
Hello, I'm Henry Bialowas. I'm an architect here in Bathurst. In my own background, as a student, I did a thesis on sacred geometry, among other things. Yeah, it was actually called Architecture of the Dark Side. And what I meant by that was the...
Sorry, what university did you attend?
So, this was at RMIT in Melbourne.
Right, yes, Melbourne.
And this wasn't so much the dark in the sense of the occult, but simply the part of architecture that had been somehow occluded. In other words, we don't deal with sacred geometry in the modern sort of age. But it's occurred to me that there are many people throughout history that have used sacred geometry, and sacred places and sacred sites evolved, but we don't have them in Western culture as such. So I was intrigued by these things, but this was like 30 or more years ago, and of course the thesis proved rather disastrous academically. It just wasn't well received because it polarised people, and people in those days really weren't interested in the subtle underpinnings of ancient architecture and all that kind of thing. There's a different movement about now. I think more people are much more open to these things.
Professor Proudfoot probably helped a little bit of that.
The establishment is very resistant to these notions. So the scale, so whether it's the Greek, the Indus, the Egyptian, they cannot be connected. That they just will not entertain this idea in the slightest. Even though that the symphony of coincidence, of connections in proportions and measures, just keeps coming back, and that in modern buildings such as the US Capitol, which are known to have esoteric backers and origins from there, well, it's there to be measured, it's there to be tested, and it's just repeated across the world, the modern world, going back through to ancient times. But for instance, so we had the long scale. Well, what's the diameter of the sun? Well, that's 26181818. Why is this so beautiful? Why is this harmonious? Because the Indus scale, we have that same number, again, just to shift a decimal point. So what we have is the beautiful proportion, the golden ratio number 144 and 55, these numbers being integral in architecture, again, going from this day back through to the most ancient time as well, back to ancient Egypt, of course, through Greece, back to Sumer, the Indus, and these other places. So we have here another piece of the beautiful symphony of coincidence. Can't possibly be true, because the official history is definitively against this type of thing. But how it also connects to the proportions of the Great Pyramid, which is still to this day one of the most magnificent, perfect buildings ever done, and it was done at the beginning of official history, when apparently there was no libraries. There was, they just stumbled upon all this, perfect construction, at the beginning of a recorded time. Now the proportions as well, 14/11 is another way to express the proportion, which brings us 1 to 1.27272727, how how does that connect? Well, because that means that the half base is 0.272727 or 27.3%, just to round it off, higher than what the base is there. Again, this +1 -1 ratio, just again a shifted decimal point. Why is that so important? Because it brings us, we've already mentioned the sun, the importance of the sun and how the long and the Indus scale and the Fibonacci's bring us to this. Well, the proportion of the size of the Earth to the moon exactly fits that scale. And so we have sun, Earth and moon, as well as this some very important geometry, one of the three important geometric mysteries that have been passed down through time and it emerges from the pyramid. So we have a animation here showing, so again you draw a circle around it, flip it up, and what do we get? We get the scale of the Earth and the moon, we get the circle and the square. Now this on its own, let's just call it coincidence, but what's the official Egyptology reaction to this? Well, Bialowas.
Nine, 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 nine.
Just like the presence of tobacco and cocaine and evidence of other plant life from the Americas existing in ancient Egypt, it's simply not tolerated by the establishment. Doesn't matter what your data is, doesn't matter what evidence you have, it's simply not to be discussed, it's career death. John Baines, an Egyptologist, said it out aloud. They're shameless when it comes to this suppression of information. But anyway, that this important astronomical information converges with systems of measurement and proportions such as the golden number and this continual concept of sun, earth and moon. Again, this is all coincidence, you know, officially we cannot look at it here, but sun, earth and moon. The natural proportions that are built into these bodies are the ones which are built into the systems of weights and measures going back through time, through architecture, not just the US Capitol and modern structures where it might be understood because that knowledge was known at the time, but it actually carries through back to ancient temples, and not just one or two, but virtually every single one that I've looked into myself, from the stone circles in England, all across to Japan, even across the oceans to the Americas. But the long scale or Persian scale, the Indus scale, and now the Egyptian royal cubit, how does this connect to these? Well, it's another part of the symphony of coincidence, and the same themes from part one is embodied in this, and it's time and measurement, which exquisitely connected. Now E-1 just happens to be how many feet there are per Egyptian royal cubits within a fraction of a human hair. A level of accuracy which, you know, we're only talking the most modern equipment can tell the difference of. And here we come to another very important point regarding the pyramid. So if you're standing at the southwest corner, what do we have? We have in the Royal Babylonian scale, as I mentioned in part one, and how that connects to the Ark of Utnapishtim, 7.18055. Again, the shifted decimal point, and within that fraction of it. Now that's viewed as a three-dimensional object, but I mean you're standing at the corner and you see the double base, two base of the Great Pyramid. And here I think is one of the points which has been lost. There's been some great work done on the pyramid, but I have a difference of opinion, and I've outlined it before, we'll have a look at it again. The pyramid is not a two-dimensional plan on the Earth. Now usually the number given for the pyramid is at a scale in relation to the Earth of 43,200. Well, it is correct in that it describes half the Earth, but there's a whole other system which will join all these things together and actually put the number at 86,400, not 43,200. And let's look at that. Okay, so the time, as in the second, and the meter are connected. And we'll also connect it to these other systems, but first the so-called modern meter and the so-called modern second that we have now. How many seconds are there per day, well 24 hours per day, 60 minutes, we'll break it down, and there are 86,400 seconds per day. The height of the US Capitol building is 864 hand, the same number which occurs in so many of these other structures going back to time, and not just in the measurements, but even in the number of statues, etc. It's, you know, across all these ancient temples. One of you probably, I think, the oldest existing sundial is an Egyptian sundial, and it shows the 12-hour day as well. They divided the day into 12, hence the night as well. 24-hour day is an ancient concept. There's more of it, there's evidence of it. But did you know that George Washington and Jefferson were planning on, amongst other weights and measures, they wanted to introduce the US foot, let's call it, which would make the US yard 0.99438 meters of the meter we use now. That is based on the 1 second pendulum at 45 degrees north of the equator, which goes back centuries before this. Marin Mersenne, the second comes from a pendulum which is effectively 1 meter long. Here's an example. Now, I've swung no more than 30 degrees, doesn't matter what the weight of the pendulum is, as long as the center of the gravity is there, and the pendulum length to get the second changes as you move north and south because of slight variations in gravity. But at 45 degrees north, this would have, the US almost introduced the metric scale, so to speak, even though it's technically imperial, but they were going to move away from the English foot and bring about this system of measure. So the foot, or hence the yard, was based on a 1 second pendulum. Time and distance measure are connected. That's where it comes from. This was not brought in after. This is the origin of the meter. Again, it predates the official history in regards to the meter, and this is not contentious at all. Marin Mersenne, Huygens, and these other guys, you know, just forget what most of the literature is in regards to the history of a meter, because it's just bullshit. It's really, really bad. So far off, it's just built on assumption. But anyway, that arc, so if you swing that pendulum, which gives you 86,400 seconds in between that 30 degrees, well, what's the length of that arc? Well, a 1 meter pendulum, so you just draw a bigger circle, where comes that portion of the circle, 1/12 of that circle, is pi over 6 meters, which is the Egyptian royal cubit, or E minus 1 feet. So the meter, the foot, the royal cubit, the US foot, which was almost introduced by the founding fathers in America, this is all joined together again. 1 meter equals 1 second equals 1 Egyptian royal cubit. You can do this at home, and just, you can, you know, even the Wikipedia page has this information. Yet some people just are so resistant to it. It's a mental health issue. But the proposed US foot, the actual meter, the second, the Egyptian royal cubit, these are all joined together. It's another example of this harmony. But this will also connect us to the older systems of measurement. But, well, 86,400 seconds per day, 864 being one of those key numbers built into the US Capitol building, the second, the time, all joined in. But now, I mentioned the Indus scale. One Indus foot, well, 3 of those is 1.0054 meters. But Mohenjo-Daro is at 27.3 degrees north. It's not at 45 degrees north. The pendulum changes there. Well, guess what the pendulum 1 second is at Mohenjo-Daro? I'll leave that to you. The concept of time, the concept of measurement are joined together. They cannot be separated. We're sort of taught in this way that they have no connection at all. Absolute crap, nonsense. Again, this is in the literature, the existing literature. This is not apart from considering the meter and the Egyptian royal cubit. However, how even the sundial, how all these things go together. And the official response to this is, okay, well, you can show it mathematically, you can measure the pyramid, you can measure all these structures, all these things comes together, and it's all just a coincidence. And again, Zoe Hawas's reaction to this type of stuff, when he has his temper tantrums.
9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9.
Okay, so the symphony of coincidence in regards to the Great Pyramid and how all these measures exquisitely connect back to the US Capitol building. The number usually given to show the scale of the Great Pyramid to the size of the Earth, 43,200. I believe that that's half correct, and I think that there's a much more elegant answer to that. But first we need to understand how the pyramid was built. So we have the pyramid itself, and then you see in the top left corner, it's built on the socle, or the paving stones. Then we have at the corner, we have the sockets. Now each one of them is of a different size. You can sort of coloured them, given them colour, so we can understand. So the socle, or the paving stone, gives it a little bit extra height. The sockets at the corner give it a little bit extra length. And now we need to consider the Great Pyramid, because the 43,200 number comes off basically by looking at it in a two-dimensional schematic theme. However, the pyramid is not on a 2D piece of paper, it's a three-dimensional object. And that concept of considering it to be a three-dimensional object brings us back to the E minus 1 feet per Royal Egyptian cubit, and how the Royal Egyptian cubit connects to the 1 meter pendulum, which defines 1 second, and there being 86,400 seconds per day. The divisions of time, such as 24 hours per day, is an ancient concept. It's not new at all. And so let's consider the pyramid as a three-dimensional object and include the information in regards to, well, the established Egyptian royal cubit of the time upon which the Great Pyramid was built. And so we need to, this will connect also to the Indus scales, and to, well, the Royal Egyptian cubit, the meter, the concept of time, the concept of length as well, and we'll have a look at that now. Okay, so the Great Pyramid, the ratio I would contend is not 43,200 to describe half of the Earth, it's 86,400 to describe the whole Earth, also seconds a meter, and the Royal Egyptian cubit. Now the sockets at the corner give the pyramid proportions, gives it a little bit more length, and they're different on each corner. But if we look at the northeast corner, including the sockets, and we multiply that by 86,400 as in seconds per day, and has the second and the meter, and the Egyptian royal cubit is all connected, well, what we get is 463.812 meters. Well, that's the rotational speed of the Earth. So if you stand at the northeast corner and look at the pyramid, that's how fast the Earth is rotating at the equator per second. Another connection to the 86,400 seconds per day, the meter and the cubit, and it all comes together. Therefore, if we multiply that distance by 86,400, we get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. We get a description of the Earth, the size of the Earth in regards to the circumference, which is, what's hugely important as well. And so once more, the meter, the second, and the Egyptian royal cubit and the Great Pyramid is bringing us to this understanding, but you need to have a look at it as a three-dimensional object. You need to include the sockets, and we'll have a look at the socle next, but this is just one aspect. So we've through this by looking at the northeast corner, including the sockets, which is a very not very much talked about aspect of it, or the socle, giving it the height. We're going to get some extraordinary information, another part of the symphony of coincidence. So the sockets, looking from the northeast corner, they add a little bit of distance to the size of the base of the Great Pyramid. That gave us the speed of the Earth per second, 86,400, and or the equatorial circumference of the Earth. But the socle, or the paving stones, which give a little bit of extra height to the height of the Great Pyramid. Multiply that by 86,400 and you get the polar diameter of the Earth. Not the polar radius, but the polar diameter. And which now the number 86,400, the seconds per day, that 1 meter pendulum also defining the Royal Egyptian cubit, which defines the Great Pyramid itself. These all come together and we get the size of the Earth, including the slight flattening, because the Earth is not a perfect sphere, it's slightly flat at the top, and the symphony of coincidence continues. Of course, the standard response to the fact that time, the meter, the cubit, the size of the Earth, the size of a Great Pyramid, and how they connect to the pendulum and to the history of the meter, the foot, going back to ancient times such as Sumer. How does, the Indus Valley, how is this received? Only one way.
Nine, 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 nine.
And if you go chasing rabbits, and you know you're going to fall, tell 'em all.
And so in review, the US Capitol building, 288 feet high. This will bring us to beautiful scales on the ancient Longfoot, Persian, Northern Foot as it's called, the Indus Foot, which brings us proportions of a Great Pyramid, size of the Sun, the Fibonacci scales, which in itself will then lead us to the size of the Earth and the Moon in regards to another. So we have Sun, Earth and Moon, these very Masonic esoteric concepts, time, distance, Euler's number, viewing the Great Pyramid as a three-dimensional object, the number of seconds per day, 12 hours per day, the George Washington, Jefferson almost bringing in essentially an imperial unit, which would have been effectively 1 meter, which brings us to the proportions of a Great Pyramid in relation to the Earth, speed of the Earth. Episode 1, musical scales, Pythagorean scales, how they all coalesce into one another, and we've only skimmed the surface of this so far, only touched the surface, because all of these will connect to so many other points. More information on music, lots more information on astronomy, beautiful arithmetic, and of course geometry, these numbers being essential in geometry in regards to angles, degrees, proportions, all these things come together. Time, ancient time, modern systems of time, in the Americas, such as the very famous Mayan calendar, Mayan maths. They were brilliant mathematicians. There was a room discovered where they'd calculated up to 1 million years in the future the positions of the stars, and of the sun, and just extraordinary levels of information. But we just so dead set on this view that ancient man was some sort of primitive rock clumping guy who knew nothing, and well, it's just silly. The Yugas, the Sumerian kings list, how Sumerian king list will connect to the Epic of Gilgamesh and the size of the Ark of Utnapishtim, which gives us systems of measure in 1, 2 and 3 dimensions. Weights and measures, they are written into the ancient history, and it's the same pattern exists across the world. So this will be the end of episode 2. Hope you enjoyed, hope you got something out of it. Remember, we're skimming the surface, I'm moving really quickly through this, and there's still lots more yet to come. So with that, hope you enjoyed and have a good one.